Hello and welcome to Succinct and Substantial. This is episode 4 of Succinct and Substantial, and I'm really delighted to introduce you to and talk with today Jeremy Gloff. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hello, thank you for having me on the podcast.
I'm
I'm
so
very
glad you're
excited.
here. Yay. Jeremy, you have been a musician and a songwriter and a keyboardist and a guitarist for many years. I want to wish you a happy 50th birthday. That was just a few days ago.
Thank
And
you.
on your 50th birthday, you released your 25th album. Congratulations and happy belated birthday.
Thank you so much.
I'm really curious about, first of all, I'd really like for you to tell us about the album that you just put out. And then let's also talk about all of the other albums that you've put out and some highlights from your very long and storied career.
Okay, so the album that I released is called 50 AF, The Best of Jeremy Gloff, Volume 2. So I do feel that the last 10 years have kind of been Act 3 of my creative life. And I just wanted to release a little memento to highlight the last 10 years. I released 5 albums in my 40s. I collected the hit songs from the 5 albums. I did record 6 new songs for the album. So actually, a lot of things happened in my life last year that were, some of them were difficult to go through. So recording these 6 new songs really were a lifeline at times to navigate through some choppy waters. And it was so nice to kind of, by the time my birthday got here, everything smoothed out. Things are pretty good. And it was nice to have these 6 songs to always remember this time. And I gave out the CD to anybody that came to the party.
Oh, that's excellent. And the party was at the Disco Dolls in
Hmm.
Tampa, Florida, for we're recording this on Zoom. So this is going to be a video podcast as well as an audio podcast. So for those of you who are watching and or listening, I'm glad that you're here. If you don't know about the Disco Dolls in Tampa, definitely check them out. They had a fantastic birthday party there, and I got to see some of the photos of it. Even though I'm up in here in Philadelphia, I was celebrating with you in spirit and in heart. And Jeremy, you and I have actually been friends for a while, and you actually have had me as part of your creative projects, which I absolutely loved. Really appreciate that. So part of the preparation that I did for the interview was going to your YouTube channel. And if you haven't been to Jeremy's YouTube channel, really easy to find, Jeremy Gloff, Gloff. And you can watch a bunch of his videos there and hear his music. So I went back and watched and listened to a lot of your music. The one of the ones that you released last year was the one, I think it's On the Road to Bartow or On the
Yep.
Way to Bartow.
Yep.
That's a really, really lovely song and just has this really fantastic feel of remembering the best times in life, enjoying the simplicities of life. And one of the things that I really loved about the video is that you're in the Disco Dolls gold throne chair, which I have gotten the opportunity to sit in myself, and you are sitting on a bridge, which I'm guessing is in Bartow. Is it in Bartow,
Oh,
Florida?
that the video where I'm in the gold chair is actually my new single. That was us.
Oh, that was us. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got them confused. Well,
I
I
know
that's
there's so many videos. The Road to Bartow one, I'm actually in Bartow, like wandering around the covered bridge and in their pizza shop and all that stuff.
Okay. And I think maybe I got them confused because they're both kind of out in nature
Yeah.
and in your latest video you're sitting in that gold chair wearing a crown, which seemed very appropriate. So tell me a little bit about the filming of that particular video. I think it was you, and then I think I saw your friend and fellow musician Shay Krispinski, if I'm remembering correctly, in that one.
Yep, she was in that one, and Christine from the Disco Dolls actually filmed the "That Was Us" video. We loaded up the gold throne into her vehicle, and we just drove around every spot in the video is a spot from my past. So I talk about some of the spots in the song. It was actually a little bit of a bittersweet day because when you're revisiting like a journey of your life and places where you used to hang out that are sometimes empty buildings, we actually went to one house that was in the song and it was completely gone. We went up and down the street and it was just completely torn down and replaced with a new build. So that was the first site we actually visited to start the video, and it added kind of a melancholy that I didn't even expect. Like I wasn't prepared for the house to not even exist anymore. So truly the video and the song are just about we all create our legacies And we have our circle of friends, we have our bubble of existence, and it's bigger than time and space. We're just, we're an energy, and you just move throughout our time on this planet together.
I think a lot of your music reflects that too, that you have reflected your song Facebook Pictures, I think reflects that, and a few of the others that I listened to. And then I also watched the documentary Moments of Euphoria, and in that you also do a retrospective of the year that you made the album Light Rail.
Yep.
And that also had this bittersweet tinge to it, even though you were doing this sort of pop homage album. And it had a lot of those elements of pop, but it does have this really bittersweet flavor to it. But I think that's one of the things that I really like about your music is that it has this, it's very sweet, it can be very uplifting, but you also do introduce these elements of, we all deal with loss, and we all deal with sadness, and we all deal with being burned out and having too much on our plates. And that the solace for that is very often the friendships that we have that carry us through. And then you also touched on something too about the process of writing and producing this music as also a way for you to process those feelings.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I've noticed of all of the folks that I have had the pleasure to speak with is the process of being an artist in whatever media you practice in as a way of extracting the poison in order to get to the medicine. And I hear that in your music. So I'm curious, what drew you to be a musician in the first place? Of all of the media that you could have like been a part of as an artist, what is it about music in particular that draws you in?
Well, I think my introduction to music was at such a young age. I remember my mom cleaning houses when I was a kid, and she had the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album and, of course, the White Album. And then my cousin Kevin had the Blondie records. My uncle Dave had the Madonna records in '84. But when I was in kindergarten and first grade, I didn't collect toys. I was already collecting records. So one of my first Christmas presents was the Best of Blondie in 1980 when I was 5 years old. So I got a toy keyboard and I pretended I was Christine McVie, and the vacuum cleaner was my microphone. But I started writing songs when I was 5 or 6. And then it wasn't until I was 18 or 19 when it became a diary. When I became a big Joni Mitchell fan, that's when the lyrics more became a journal of the things I was seeing and doing. But there was never, geez, I guess only my first 4 years of my life I wasn't a musician, so I don't know anything else. And there's times that I want to quit music so I can explore like who am I beyond this? Because I think there's so many different versions of ourselves we can be that when you lock into one, you're neglecting another, which is kind of weird to say, probably.
You know what? It really makes sense though, and I think that's one of the how do I put this? One of the things about really great artists is that driven passion in just a handful of areas. Very few of us have the kind of overreaching talent that say Michelangelo did, but of course it wasn't just him.
Right.
Right. He had a whole team of people that were also helping him to produce. And I think that's one of the things that we don't always get in our modern life, right? You could have a whole lot of different avenues that you want to choose, but unless you have, a 40-person staff to be able to do all the background and the research for you, you kind of have to pick a few or maybe just one and really stick with it and
Right.
dive deep into it. And I'm glad that you have. Going back and listening to your music like that was really a lovely journey. And it was great to like, because I got to be in a couple of your videos, which was
Yeah.
great fun. One of the videos that you made was Jeremy Gloff is nasty.
Oh yeah.
And the day that we filmed that video, you were dealing with some really deep grief. And you had mentioned in the documentary about that album and making that video in particular. When we went to, of all places, we went to a pole studio, a stripper pole studio, right, where they
Yeah, we did.
people how to do pole dancing, which had this great vibe for the vibe that Christine of the Disco Dolls was going for as your videographer that day. And in the documentary, you talk about that being a really bittersweet day and that what you saw in the video for yourself was this person who was just dealing with all this grief,
Yeah.
and that it kind of worked for creating that withdrawn disco vibe. When I just watched the video before I rewatched the documentary again, I don't think that comes across so much as, it looks to me in that video as if you are just very standoffish,
Okay.
as you might expect of, a disco star. And then you totally flip that on its head by then dancing around in the hot dog costume, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like for the view, and this kind of gets to what we may be going through as individual artists on the inside, and the turmoil that we're experiencing on the inside doesn't always come through in the art that we produce. And what came across for me as the viewer was more that you were going for complete opposites.
Okay.
There was this intentionality to that, even though we knew that that was going on for you. But what comes across, I think, objectively in that video is that you, on the one hand, have this very serious, and you were sort of Robert Palmer-esque on this video,
Oh,
as well as the other video that you did, Slow It Down. You were going for that same kind of vibe where you're like very serious in front of the microphone, and then Casey and I are doing the sort of the dancing
yeah,
girls,
you
and then
two.
also like the backup singer vibe. And then it's cut with these visions of you dancing around in a hot dog costume or making these sort of vampy Janet Jackson nasty girl moves. And so what I took away from that was this: here's the serious musician versus the person who's just cutting loose and being a part of the action. But I think it also speaks to, on the behind the curtains part of that particular year. And you talked about this album that you just put out, of being a retrospective, yes, but also the six new songs that you wrote, and that you've also had a lot of difficulties and challenges in the third act of your career. And I think that's probably also true, in earlier parts of your career, and using your art to process some of those feelings. The other thing that I noticed from looking at your YouTube videos was encountering the comments from people who had watched the videos and how much your music means to people. And I know
Oh,
that too from being in person. And I think that's one of the things that music in particular, live music, of course, because then there's this interaction between you and the audience. And that kind of leads me to my next question, because we don't always get that when we go to see, a gallery exhibition or something, right?
mhm,
When you are live with people and performing music live, there's an interaction there that you don't necessarily get if you are in the visual arts, for example.
for sure.
So tell me a little bit about your experience. So you produced your first album 32 years ago, and I'm
Hmm.
I'm guessing that you've probably performed in front of audiences for at least that long, if not longer.
Sure.
How has that evolved for you over the years and over the decades, really? How has that involved in your interaction with your audience?
Well, I always ask myself how much of it is society changing and how much of it's just me getting older. Because I remember when I started off playing in the early to mid 90s, I would play in a lot of coffee shops in Buffalo, New York, and people were just, they had such a focused attention to whoever was on the stage, really soaking in the lyrics, really soaking in the feelings. And it was just such a connection. And as the 2000s came, and then, there wasn't social media when I started out as a musician. So, then more cameras came out, and then the phones came out, and then, you know, Facebook came, and I just never felt as connected with people as I did in those first few shows. And I don't know if it's youth or if it was the way the culture was or a combination of both.
That's a very interesting observation. And I would surmise from that it's probably a combination of both. You and I are pretty close in age, and that's also been my experience, that
Right.
growing up in my early adulthood, and everything that I was involved in then was face-to-face interaction, maybe some lengthy conversations with friends over the telephone if they were not here, in town. Most of the time it was only getting on the phone to then plan the outing where we would then be meeting in person and paying full complete attention to each other, or to whatever we were going to see, whether that was a movie or a live music performance. And I think Your observation there is a very keen one, and that it's probably a combination of both. On the other hand, I do think that our society has a, is it an evolution? I'm not so sure.
Right.
I'm not entirely certain. Although I will say, being able to create my own, and you also have a podcast where you share and use these tools of technology to share your work, but it's a very different phenomenon than if you and I were, seated in a room together listening to an album and talking about that album versus doing it over the internet. And then, of course, with the advent of social media, our attention span, and not just social media, but the existence of social media on these tiny little devices that we can carry around with us,
Hmm.
and how that has really diverted our attention and created so many distractions that it is really hard to pay attention and stay focused, even for those of us like you and I who have been around for a while, long enough to remember what it was like to not be reliant on those
Right.
devices. Who knows where this is all going to take us?
I mean, I feel like right now it's so easy to really reach a lot of people, but it's also just as easy to silo and really go into little subsects and small groups. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword that we're dealing with.
Very much so. I think the idea of a silo is a really good one, and these little islands of, we're only hanging out with people who, are producing things that we want to hear, and that concerns me, and maybe it does you too. I
Yeah.
want to be exposed to a lot of different things, and even if they're ideas and people that I don't necessarily like or agree with. But then I also grew up at the dinner table with a grandfather, well, two grandfathers who were both of them horrific racists.
Hmm.
One of them could not get through a dinner without telling a terribly racist or otherwise bigoted joke. And the
Hmm.
other one, who was much more intellectual, but his racism was in some ways even more insidious because it was based in intellectualism and intellectual elitism. So, but at the same time, when I would have ideas that would contradict his, he didn't just shut me down. He would ask me to support my argument. And we were expected to, at the dinner table, disagree with one another and be able to have civil discourse. And of course, it wasn't always civil. Sometimes chairs and things were thrown. But on the other hand, I feel like one of the things that I took away from that was an ability to be in the same room with people who didn't think and felt the same way that I did,
Right.
and not to have that just completely break down our ability to communicate with each other. So it does feel like a loss. I think that there is a loss there because of the technology that we're now able to hold in our hands. On the other hand, you and I are getting to meet across time and
Right.
space, right? And have an interesting conversation. So, it's all a tool. I guess it depends on how we use it and what
Yeah.
we're using it for. So let me pause there and say thank you for using it to put
Oh.
good stuff out in the world. So in line with that, you had mentioned about the changes in technology and audiences. And so do you find that are you able to use the tools of social media in order to get more people to gather when you bring people together in person? Or do you have the same sort of challenges of bringing people together as when you had to like print out flyers and drive around town and pass them out?
Well, I think the trick is to always know the tools you have and how to harness them best. So right now I'm doing a series at the Disco Dolls Sound Salon, which I feel like you attended a couple of them when you were in town. But uh, the first couple seasons, I was really discouraged because some a band would come perform, but then they would never go see the other bands. And to me, that kind of hurt my soul because I want people to take as much as they give. So if a performer comes and says, "Here I am, watch me," but then never comes to watch someone else, that's not the scene that I want to curate. So the last season that I put together, I sent an email to everyone who participated. I said, "I'd love to have you play. This event's 4 times a year. If you play this event, you have to attend at least two more." And everyone agreed, and it was exactly what I wanted. Like everyone was robust. People came out. People were watching as much as they performed. So I think, having that Facebook group and being able to use that group as a way to gather people, set boundaries, set expectations. It wouldn't have mattered if it was 1993 and I was photocopying those things or if I was putting it on the computer, you just have to know how to harness the tools that you have. And that, that was kind of a ballsy thing to come up with to tell people like, hey, you need to watch as much as you do, but it worked.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that about setting boundaries and setting expectations. It's been my experience too that if you expect it from people and you clearly communicate that those are your expectations, most of the time people will live up to those expectations. And
Right.
I also think there's a very interesting phenomenon, and let me see if I can remember the name of this book. Um, Why We Gather, I think. I will research it and I will put it in the show notes after the conversation because I remember reading this book and it was right at the height of COVID. So there was the irony of it is that I was reading this book about why we gather at in-person gatherings, and the author, I think her name is Priyanka something, and she talked about in this book that it was really important to, for example, if you were going to have any kind of gathering, that you put a lot of parameters on that gathering, that you actually, that it's a benefit to people to say there are only going to be 10 people invited to this event, or 20 people, or 50 people.
Hmm.
And then don't go beyond that, really stick to that. And then making sure that you don't order, for example, too much food, and to maybe having an event that isn't food centered, maybe have it
Right.
centered around an activity of some kind. And then if you're going to have this activity, to set really strict boundaries about that activity. And that if you're going to, for example, play a game, that there only be one winner and one runner up. And she
Right.
talked about, the reason that we gather is to have these interactions with people, but sometimes, honestly, people don't know how to be with each other.
Yeah.
And that putting together events as an event planner, that it's really important to put those boundaries in place so that people do know what's expected of them. And
Right.
they know it's just like the dress code, for example. Is it casual? Is it white tie? Is it black tie? All of those things actually really help us when we come together by setting those expectations. And I remember being at first resistant to some of the ideas. And then I thought, well, it's COVID, so I can't put any of this into place. And so I just reread the book a couple of times. And I found after a second and third reading that I really started to agree with this idea of, if you're going to create events for people where they're coming together in person, being able to put those parameters on it and then setting expectations in, you end up having a better experience for everybody. You, as the event planner, have a better
Right.
experience because you've set those expectations and set those boundaries, and then everybody else does too.
Right.
So I'm glad to hear that that was successful for you, and I think they probably, it sounds like they also got a lot out of that as
Yeah.
well, because the other half of that whole experience for that you were wanting was for people to come and experience each other's offerings. So
Yeah.
I think
Cool.
that's a really good way of going about it. And also, using whatever tools are available to you and learning how to harness them.
Yeah.
These tools of technology can really come and bite us if we don't learn how to harness them.
Right.
As we've seen in one of the stories that you talk about in your documentary, is you had posted something
Oh,
that then some person put comments in there that just ended up blowing up in your face, and that is one of those things that will make you lose your faith in humanity, is reading the comments below, right? And all
yeah.
of the nasty ways. And I think when people have a certain feeling of anonymity, that they can just get away with saying whatever they want. And that's very unfortunate. That was my experience working as a telephone customer service person, that people could be really verbally abusive because they couldn't
Sure.
see my face. And when I
Right.
did in-person customer service, people were 5 times as polite. And I'm guessing that that's been true for you too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, so let's do a little bit of a retrospective here, because things have shifted culturally so much over the years. I think in particular for queer people, for
Sure.
LGBT people of all kinds. So I'm interested to hear from you about what your experience has been as a gay performer and as a musician who has gone through life and what that was like for you. Like when did you come out? Have you always been out? What was that like for you? And how has that experience changed for you over the years?
Well, it's interesting because the moment I realized I was gay, I guess I was 19, and I always before that I identified as bisexual, and then I just realized I'm like, I this is weird, but at that time I fantasized about men, but I dated women. And I didn't realize that you could date the people you fantasize. Like to me, it didn't even
Right.
dawn on me that they were the same thing. Like, oh, I could be in love with this man and he could be my husband and I'm sexually attracted to him. Like it's all in the same glass. Like to me, so I just had this aha moment sitting on this. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I was writing a song called Prince Charming, but like he could be my Prince Charming. I'm like, oh, I'm gay. Oh, okay. I told my friends like, oh, we knew, girl.
What that we could have told you that, right?
Yeah, they're like, okay. And so when I started performing, I remember I did my first album. The last line is "I wish he was here again," and that was kind of my way of coming out to my friends is by putting a gender in the lyrics. But this is pre Ellen. Like when Ellen came out on TV, they kind of switched the culture a little bit, and Ellen became problematic later on. But at the time, her TV show really opened up the queer conversation a lot in mainstream media. So performing before that, there were some times I was scared in some of the audience I was in because my songs were always, I released an album in 96 called Below the Velvet, and it's very graphically honest about my experience as a gay man at that time. From like secret affairs in high school, getting beat up by the basketball player, but having a secret affair with him. Like, you know what I mean?
Good
Like,
grief. Right.
and
Right.
being in the closet, getting out of the closet. And even some of my early albums are a little ignorant in my own uh, dealing with some of the subjects because, we're always evolving and we're educating ourselves more, and the culture does lift in some ways. So I feel in some ways we're a lot more open now. We're a lot more understanding and educated and realize that not everything's black and white. And, now that I'm 50, I still have to catch myself to not be too old fashioned and be like kids these days because I think things are always evolving. And even if we don't understand everybody, we have to understand that that is somebody's experience and we have to put our arms around them and say, it's okay that you're you.
That's a good point. I think understanding is not always required for acceptance.
Right.
You don't have to understand. You don't. You don't have to understand why somebody is the way that they are in order to accept them for who they are. As long as you're not hurting people, as long as you're not beating them up or being mean to them. I had to laugh when you were talking about like realizing in that moment when you realize, oh, I'm gay. I too was raised, I mean, it's like, and it's nobody was like pushing me down. Nobody was suppressing me or
Right.
forcing me into the closet. But I was boy crazy when I was growing up, totally boy crazy. Never looked at girls, never thought about girls really at all. And then as I got into college, and I mean, I suppose quite a few women have experiences with other women and not worry so much if they're um, gay or not. But then there was a moment, and of course, I'm with Charlotte, and she was not always Charlotte.
Hmm.
Really, she was inside.
Of
And
course.
for years and years and years, another friend of mine who is gay, although he's about our age, and he has told me that he's actually now thinking that maybe he's not gay, maybe he's bi.
Okay.
At like 56, he's like, maybe I actually want to be with women too. I don't know.
Right.
Um, and he said to me for years, "Are you sure you're not bi? Are you sure you're not a lesbian?" And I kept saying, "No, I'm with this man. Clearly, I'm with this man. Can't you see I'm with this man? I'm head over heels." And then when Charlotte told me that she needed to transition and come out and be who she really was, I sat down with him and I said, "I can't." So I called him, like, "We can't have this conversation over the telephone. I need to tell you in person."
Okay.
And so the first thing that I said to him when we sat across the table from each other was, "You know how you always told me that you thought I was a lesbian? Well, it turns out that's true. And here's
Oh,
why." And his response was, "Well, now what am I going to do? Who's going to be my heteronormative couple to to be friends with. I was like, I don't know, it's not going to be us anymore. So I think you're right. I think sometimes our quote unquote orientation can evolve and change over
Right,
the years. And sometimes, as you mentioned, right, that we sometimes come to understand ourselves better in act two and three of
right.
our lives. And that retrospective can be really helpful. So tell me a little bit about, let's talk about your experience with our dear friend, and somebody that I don't know about you. I missed him a lot, and he left us very early and very suddenly. Vince Kral. I had had a conversation with him not too very long before he passed away. And then when I was watching the videos, he created some of your videos and he's in several of those
Hmm.
videos. And those were very bittersweet moments for me. I wanted to interview him for this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, that's not going to happen. So I would just like to hear about your friendship with Vince and some of the projects that y'all got to work on and any thoughts that you want to share about that.
Sure. So the first time I met Vince was at an open mic. He was dressed as Princess Leia, I believe, and playing, the guitar. And he came up, he watched my set, and he came up to me. He said, "I want to buy every one of your albums." And who knows how many I had out then? 20, like I don't know. But he gave me a wad of money. He took the CDs, and he was a supporter from the first 1 minute that we talked. And that's the kind of human being he was. Is he was all in to just lift people up and support them. He's someone that probably gave more than he took, and that's not normal. In my experience working with artists, myself, we're all a little bit narcissistic. To find someone who's more of a giver than a taker as an artistic soul just made him such a precious human being. He did the video for my song "Gonna Be All Right" from Light Rail. I had just gotten Bell's palsy, so I I was only in the video for like 3 seconds. He had me dressed up as Princess Leia, but my face is all like because I was frozen.
Right.
But I said, just do your thing. And it's just he dressed up as Superman, and that's who he was. He was a Superman in his own way, in my opinion.
Oh, I totally agree. One of the things that he told me in he and I chatted on the phone for like 3 hours, not maybe 2.5 weeks before he died. And he was telling me about his name, and the last name Kral meant king. And I really loved that for him. And because when I had given him a tarot reading and I did for one of the movies that he made, he actually had me give him a tarot card reading. And it was so meaningful for him, even though, he just wanted it to sort of be a scene in the movie. And then it
Oh,
ended up being so meaningful for him that he reached out to me again, a few times over the years and asked me to give him readings. And in his last reading that I gave him, three kings showed up, which is
oh,
pretty statistically unlikely because there are only four kings in
right.
the deck, right? And so when I pointed that out to him, he was like, "Well, my last name actually means king." And I was like, "Well, there you go."
Yeah.
And so to see him as Superman in that video, Going to Be All Right, and then that one particular scene in that video where he's standing in the revolving door, like stuck
Oh,
as
yeah.
Superman in the revolving door, it was, all of that was just really, really deeply meaningful. And my hope is that I'll be able to do an interview with Mitzi and some of the other. Mitzi, I think, is one of his very, very close friends.
Yeah, Mitzi
And
Gordon. Yeah.
yeah, and so Mitzi Gordon, yes. And so what I would like to do at some point in future episodes is do a retrospective and share some photos and videos of Vince's art, so that everybody can get a chance to see the kind of amazing artist he was and also get a sense of really what an amazing and generous human being he was.
Yeah.
All right, let's come back to Jeremy Gloff because you are alive and well, or at least you are alive AF right now.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and so we're wrapping up on the last few minutes of the interview, and I want to thank you, Jeremy, for coming on and chatting with me and telling me about your process and your experience as a musician and an artist and a gay man and all of the things that make you the amazing human being that you
No.
are. I would also like for people to know where they can find you, where you like to interact with people. Obviously, I mentioned the YouTube channel. Are there other places where people can find you on the internet? And then if you are local to the Tampa Bay area, where are you performing next or anything like that you want to share?
Sure. I'm on Facebook, Jeremy Gloff. All my music is on Bandcamp and Spotify and wherever you want to find it. Just put in Jeremy Gloff. And that's basically where you can find me. I am on Instagram. I did delete my X and my TikTok, and I feel like there's only so many pieces of ourselves digitally that can exist. And if we're spreading ourselves over too many sites, I just felt like I was fragmented. So I just wanted to consciously say, I'm only putting pieces of myself in this many spots.
Okay, so
So,
people can find you on Bandcamp
yep,
and Spotify, YouTube and Facebook
yep, and Instagram,
and Instagram.
which is
And
still like a lot of places, but
trust me, yeah, it's hard not to be, right? So, but
right.
I'm glad to hear that you're kind of narrowing it down to make makes you a little easier to find. And
Yeah.
also, I'm sure you know, right, as being an artist and somebody who puts stuff out on the web, right, trying to keep track of all that stuff. You don't
Yeah.
have a spreadsheet and project management software. It can get confusing
Yeah.
fast. Um, so my last question is, do you have any performing dates coming up that people should know about?
I'm playing a house show. Oh, geez. But I'm not sure the date. But if you go to my Facebook, I will be posting it soon. I kind of
Okay.
consciously decided to take a little time off after the 50 AF show because, I feel like I've been at it since 93. So I'm like, I just want to be a civilian just for a couple weeks and not plan anything.
Okay, well, enjoy your time off, most
Thank
definitely.
you.
Thank you for doing all of this grand work in order to entertain and give us a lot of solace and comfort with your music. It was a delight to go back and just do this massive retrospective and listening to
Aw.
all of your tunes. So I'm excited to then share all of those links with people so that after they listen to or watch our conversation, that they can follow it up by listening to your music and buying some of your albums.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I love, you give so much. You know what I mean? I remember you did the tarot cardings readings for me, which were so helpful at the time. Like you see so much into people. So I just have so much love for you. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
ditto, Jeremy. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And I look forward to having a follow-up conversation when after you've had a chance to have a nice break and a good vacation. And
Aw.
then we'll have a follow-up. We'll have a follow-up the next time that you have a big performance or put out your next album. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, and I did forget to say I do have a Patreon. So,
Oh, Patreon too. Okay, well that's
yep.
easy since I'm going to be posting this to Patreon. So I'll just make sure that people go and follow you over there too. Now you do the phonogenics
Yes.
podcast over there as well.
Yep.
Tell
So I
us
have a
about that.
It's we take a whole artist discography and we talk about each of their albums track by track.
Okay.
So I've done 140 episodes of that.
Oh, 140?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So don't miss phonogenics on Jeremy's Patreon. Okay. All right. Well, that is a wrap. Jeremy, thank you so much. Have an excellent evening. I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.